Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NeoSystems Professional Services Monthly Webinar Series. We're excited to present today's session, Deltek Costpoint Extensibilities and Web Services Explained. I'm Don Carnevale, Director of Corporate Marketing at NeoSystems, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Next slide, please. Very briefly, just like to tell you a little bit about NeoSystems. We have four main lines of business at NeoSystems. The first is our newest line of business, which focuses on managed security and CMMC compliance and supply chain readiness. We also have a hosting line of business where we have a compliant cloud. The third line of business is actually our oldest line of business, which is managed full-blown outsourced managed services for accounting, IT services, and recruitment and human resources. And the fourth line of business, which is the one we're going to be speaking to today, is our systems integration line of business. We do perform everything from implementations, upgrades, as well as the web services and extensibilities that we'll be discussing today for a very purpose-built set of partners, including Deltek, Integrify, Workday Adaptive Planning, and SAP Concur, among others. Next slide, please. Very brief look at our agenda today. We're doing the introductions now. Next up, I'm going to bring in our first speaker who will give an overview of those Costpoint Extensibilities and Web Services. Then we'll provide a demo of how to perform those functions. And then we'll have some time at the end of our program for questions and answers. And you're certainly welcome to enter those questions into the Q&A area within the Zoom meeting at any time during the webinar. Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Brad Mitchell, Vice President of Technology Solutions at NeoSystems. Brad?
Thank you, Don. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. A couple months back, Jeff and I actually did a presentation on extensibility and web services from kind of high level. And as Don said today, this is kind of a deeper dive into that. We got a lot of good feedback, kind of wanting to see really how this works kind of behind the scenes. So that's what our the purpose is here today. I am Brad Mitchell. I'm the Vice President of Technology Solutions here at NeoSystems on the professional services side, and Jeff Arms is with me here, who heads up our tech team on the professional services side. So just a kind of a quick review of the prior presentation that we did. Extensibilities are a way to add functionality to Deltek Costpoint system, and they kind of sit, kind of think of it like an isolated layer above the normal Costpoint functionality. This is fully supported by Deltek. And usually pretty immune to upgrades and things like that. And extensibilities allow you to do all kind of customization, from adding simple fields to a screen to much more complex things like interfacing with other systems. The other technology that was pretty exciting about the most recent version of Costpoint is web services. So this allows you to external systems to pull data out of Costpoint, or even communicate within Costpoint from one extensibility unit into another screen. And so that's what we're going to kind of walk through today, and what Jeff is going to walk us through. Again, this is really a behind the scenes look, kind of how you set up extensibility, how you work with web services, kind of the potential of what you can do. So I do encourage you to put questions in the chat. I'll let Jeff know if we have questions during the presentation, or you're welcome to save them towards the end. So with that, Jeff, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Brad. Good morning, everyone. Just like Brad said, we are going to walk through some extensibilities today within the Costpoint application. Again, what extensibilities are very simple, can be something very simple, from adding new fields to a screen, to changing, changing labels, to really doing integrations between multiple systems. So today we put together something that's very simplified, but it would be almost like considered a mini integration between one application to another. But it's all contained within Costpoint. So if you see something that you think you can use, again, feel free to put something in the question, and I'll be happy to answer a question either during the presentation or at the end. So what I wanted to show you first is, the first thing we did is we actually are going to make a change to the employee employee information. So what our demo is going to do is we're going to take the employee, which we've got 100001, and we're going to add the supervisor name, but we're not going to do it through this field. or through this screen. We're actually going to do it through a screen that we created. So that's one of the first things that we can do as part of an extension is we can now create a new application. And what this is doing is we created a parameter screen. We have a few parameters. It's linked to the database. What we do is we have the employee ID. We take the employee ID from the employee screen that we just looked at, and we have the supervisor name. Again, it's a free form text field, so we just put in test user for this. Again, so the next thing that we are going to do is actually call an action. What this action will do is it will actually call a Java class. That Java class will then call a web service and update the employee screen within the database. Why we use web services is it gives you all of the front end validation instead of going directly into the database to update that field. We use front end validations, and that's what the web service does. So if there's any data that is incorrect, it will not allow it to be updated and put into the database so that when you go downstream, all of your data is correct. So any front end validations, for example, an account org, if they're not set up, would give you an error and would stop it from loading into the database. We never want to load inaccurate data. So that's why we use web services, because that protects us from having inaccurate data in our database. So the first thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to call this update employee. What we did is we actually called a Java class. That Java class then called our web service, and we received this response back that it was successfully updated in Costpoint. So now if we go back to the manage employee information and we do a refresh, we can see that the supervisor name, the test user that we had in the other screen, is now loaded into Costpoint. So again, if you think of this, again, this is from Costpoint to Costpoint, but if you actually had that data in ADP or Workday or in another third-party application, we could pull that data from that other application, load it via a web service, and load it into Costpoint. So again, normally going Costpoint to Costpoint, but we want to just show you some of the tools that we can use. Or we could go the opposite. If your system of record is Costpoint and you want to push it to a third-party tool, you could do the same thing. And instead of updating our supervisor name, we could update all of the information from into ADP or into Workday or into another third-party application that you are using. So again, that's kind of what we're doing. We've created a mini integration between one application at Costpoint to another using all of the tools that Costpoint has provided. So again, this was just a simple demo that we wanted to put together, but the next thing we wanted to show you is how it all gets put together. And what I want to do is, if we have a document here, and it just kind of shows you the two main important things is you've got your Costpoint front end, which is on the top, and you've got your database in the background or in the bottom, which really holds everything that's important to the front end. So those are your two main pieces. In the middle, the yellow is your extensibility. It starts with what we call a result set. That result set is the data that reads from the database. So again, your result set reads and writes to the database. That result set is then linked to the application. That was the new screen that we created. The parameter screen that had the employee ID and the supervisor ID. So that result set links to the application. That application, again, is displayed within the newest version of Costpoint. That application also then has the action. The action is the gears and the drop down. That was the update. That was the action that we created to update the employee. When we call the action, we are then leaving the extensibility and we're calling a Java class. that Java class is reading from the Costpoint screen, is building an XML that is read by the web service, and then we actually call the web service. The web service is something that Costpoint allows you to create, which is a web service or an API. It allows you to update data. You can update or read data from the Costpoint database using this API or backend web service. You can read it in XML, JSON, or JSON, REST, or SOAP. So you do have a few parameters, and then that web service itself loads into the database. So then again, once it was loaded in the database, we could then go back to the employee screen, look at the results set again, and see that that supervisor name was updated. So again, it makes a full circle from the original database. It reads the result set to the application, displays onto Costpoint, and we have a full integration from end to end. The next thing we want to do is actually show you a little behind the scenes of how that is actually built. The first thing I'm going to show you is what we have. It's called our Extensibility Designer. That is the tool that Costpoint provides us to build the extensions. And again, it's kind of broken down like what I've shown you before. Is we've got our RS, which is your result set. This is actually what reads from the database. Within our result set, we have some parameters and some screens. We've got our employee, we've got our supervisor code, and we have the message screen that was displayed to you it was successful or failure to the message. That result set, which is pulling from the database, is displayed within the application. That application is a brand new screen that we create within Costpoint. Once we build the application, we then add the action. The action is what is in the gears. That action is what is being initiated, what initiates the Java class. And then the Java class then initiates the web service. So if we look, here is a copy of our Java class. It's very simple. What it does is it actually reads the employee and the supervisor from the screen. It takes those pieces of data. And again, like I said, if you're familiar, it is the web service is actually in an XML format. So if you are familiar with XML, this is a properly XML format. And what we're doing is we're passing in the employee ID and the supervisor. We then actually pass that information into Costpoint using some Costpoint imports and tools that are provided, and it's referencing the web service that we built. The web service, again, is really a replication of what you can do, what you can load via the front end. For example, if you want to, it's replicating you going in and manually entering data into the employee screen and saving it. So what this web service does, again, this one is very stripped down, but we can, again, you can add one to many fields that you want. This is a copy of the web service. And again, if you see this web service, if you're familiar with the Costpoint screens, the LDME info _EMPL is the name of the employee information screen. Again, we are passing in the employee ID and the supervisor name. This is the format that it gives it to us in the employee demo or in the XML. So once we then pass that information, it then gives us a response. Again, we read that response and we display it to the Costpoint screen. Right here, employee successfully updated in Costpoint. So as you can see, even though this looks like a very simple screen, and it is we are actually taking this information, submitting it to a Java class. That Java class is reading from the screen, building a web service, calling a web service or an API within the Costpoint application, which is out of the box functionality. It updates the Costpoint and displays us a message back. So again, this one says it's updated successfully in Costpoint. But if we want to just create an employee that is not there, what we can do is we can run this one again. And again, the update was the employee was unable to be updated in Costpoint because again, this is not a valid employee. So what it did is it gave us a row not found in the result set, which means that that employee is not in Costpoint. So you can see that even though if it's successful, everything will update. If it's not successful, it will give you an error message that you can translate and determine, oh, wait, we don't have this employee into Costpoint. We need to import this one before we can update the supervisor. So again, so if you want to look at this as far as how you could use this within your system or in your environment, again, if you're using ADP, UKG, Concur, Workday, all of those applications have APIs that we can pull data from. So if that is your system of record, we can pull that data from your external system. We then can build a web service call to load all of the employee information into Costpoint so that your systems are up to date and there's no more dual entry. So one of the things that we are trying to do is, again, you want to make sure that the data is accurate. With us having to pull it and getting it directly from the third-party system, we can guarantee that the data is accurate, and then you don't have to have people going in there and doing dual work. So again, this also can be run or scheduled daily. So we could go out there, get all of the information and update it daily. So you come in the morning and then you say, okay, well, look, I updated 5 employees. These 5 updated correctly. So we're good for the day. If one of them errors out, you can determine what the error is. Maybe you had a bad account number or a bad org. You update that in your system of record the next day, or manually, you can actually download that and update that into Costpoint. So again, there's many different ways. And what we're trying to show you is we have a lot of options using extensibility and web services. Again, this is a very simple demo, but we just wanted to show you that we can use all of the tools and you can, expand on those and make a very, very, powerful tool so that your systems can be integrated into one application.
Thanks, Jeff. That's great. So we got a couple questions coming through already. So I do want to address those. One of the things I did want to emphasize is Jeff mentioned that you can schedule this. So as a custom action, like Jeff is showing on this screen, those of you familiar with Costpoint from the technical side, you can set up what's called a job server, right? And schedule a job to run occasionally, as often as you want. Here at Neo, we developed, for example, a connector to the Concur application, SAP Concur. And so our customers can schedule that on an hourly basis, for example, if they wanted to push data over to Concur. And it acts like as you can see here, it acts like any other Costpoint screen. One of the questions we got was that we would like to update a newly created table using a written SQL procedure. It wouldn't link back to the application, basically creating our own report data that Cognos would use. So if I think I'm understanding the question correctly, similar to what we see here, you could create a very basic application screen. Jeff showed a demo of being able to run an action that calls a Java class, but you can certainly run, one of the other options is you can run Java classes or stored procedures in the database. So you could actually have an action there that runs that stored procedure that you're talking about, and it would update the data that you need for reporting purposes. And you could schedule that nightly basis, hourly basis, however often you want with the normal Costpoint processes. One of the other questions we had, can extensibilities be migrated from on-premise to the cloud? Absolutely. We actually develop here at NeoSystems, and we develop extensibilities. We're doing it on our own servers. And Jeff, if you want to pull up the extensibility console again real quick, we can kind of show them. The extensibility console offers you the ability to export and import extensibility packages. So after you have this developed, tested, maybe on-prem, then you simply package this up. It puts all the database scripts it needs, all the Java classes that it needs, all the stored procedures that it needs into a zip file that then is just imported with the Extensibility Designer on the target system. And we have done that with multiple hosting providers, including the Deltek standard cloud and the GCC cloud. So definitely can put that from on-prem up to cloud, no problem. The next question regarded, is it a REST-based API? Jeff, I'll let you address that one. I think you have REST and SOAP. Either one can be used, right?
Correct. Recently, they just added the REST option. So, depending on what version you're on, I think it's like 7.1.4 or 5 is where REST came in. So anything after that, so 7.1 and up is you can use REST, and you can do REST XML or you can do REST SOAP. If you're in an older version, you still can use web services, but they then have to be SOAP UI. But yes, I would suggest if you want to use REST, we can make sure you're upgraded to at least a pretty current version, and that will work for you.
Okay. And then one of the other things I wanted to emphasize too, as far as the web services go, Jeff. So you, in this example, so you created an extensibility table, right? I think it's just simple employee ID and the supervisor name. So that was an additional table that was created via extensibility on a certain screen. And you can expose those custom fields you might have on certain screens, those extensibility fields, in web services, right, Jeff? So it's not just the standard Costpoint field, but any kind of custom fields that you create on screens, you can expose with web services, and outside applications could call that data as well.
That is correct, Brad. Anything that you see on the screen via the web services can be pushed. So if you guys are using, preprocessor files, those are limited. You cannot change any of the fields within the preprocessor. The web services allow you to use any field that is on that screen, even if they're custom Costpoint applications, or if they're extensibility fields.
Great. Okay, are there other questions out there that anyone has? Again, we kind of wanted to keep this interactive. So just got one come through. With a web service, you can go directly to Workday and import that data to Costpoint, is the question, Jeff. So can you reach from Costpoint out to web service hosted by Workday and pull that data back in?
So yes, we've done that before. We've done that, we've done an integration between Workday. So Workday allows you, so it's kind of a two-part piece. Workday allows you to download via an API all the, we can reach out to Workday for its API, pull all the data down for, the most current information. Once we save that information, we then can upload it into Costpoint using a Costpoint web service. So it's kind of a two-part process. You need to grab the information from Workday. We would store it again in the database. We then would kind of, massage the data because some of the fields are not going to be exactly the same. For example, like a status, they may have active, but we've got ACT. So we then have to massage the data a little bit, and then we upload it into Costpoint. So yes, and we do integrations all the time, and that's one of the major benefits of using the web services and the extensibilities.
Great. Got another question. Is the Extensibility Designer available with the standard install? So you do have access to the Extensibility Designer. So you would need to have access to the application server that Costpoint is running on, and it's an executable that you can run. Now you do have to get an extensibility license from Costpoint, from Deltek, I'm sorry. It is free. It does not cost anything. You just have to sign a little liability waiver saying, any kind of changes I do, I take full responsibility for. So you do have to get that in place. There is some configuration that you have to do on the application server to enable extensibility, and then you have to enable users to use extensibility in Costpoint itself. And then just kind of a side note on that. So any of these applications that you create, they do become applications in Costpoint, and they are subject to the same security that you might implement elsewhere in Costpoint. So if you want to set up role-based security where you have user groups, You can limit the accessibility to those extensibility applications to certain user groups. Those of you that use the user profile functionality in Costpoint, you can use that to show or hide extensibility units, or just not give people access to extensibility units at all. So kind of all around the gambit there. Let's see. Any best practices when applying maintenance releases or upgrading from 7.1 to Costpoint 8? Jeff, anything there that we've seen?
No, it really, the one nice thing with extensibilities, as long, again, if you're using kind of them in best practice, which again, we could help you with and do, make sure that you're doing it correctly, is when you upgrade from an MR, your extensibilities will not be touched. They will work fine. Everything should be correctly. The only time that you might run into a problem is, for example, if you add a new tab or you add a new field to a screen. And then let's say MR, the next MR, Costpoint adds a new tab to that screen. Well, Costpoint will overwrite your tab. So your tab will not be launched. You're just gonna have to change your tab from tab 4 to tab 5. So again, I would do some testing, but the only time that I've ever seen a little bit of problem is that if you've created a field and then they've added a field on top of it, the core field will take over, and you just have to change your field layout a little bit. But that's the worst that I've ever seen going from environment to environment. Besides that, everything else, I've never seen a problem when you do the upgrade, even from 7.1 to 8.
Great. And then the other question I've been asked before is putting multiple extensibilities on the same application in Costpoint. Can you talk about that real quick? Or the inability to do so, I guess I should say.
Yeah, so the one thing you do have to do is, if you are assigning, multiple extensions to the same screen, Costpoint can really only accept one extension on that at a time. So you then have to use the user profile or the user groups to determine which people have that. So, or you have to combine it into one extension. So that's just the downfall. I mean, that is, probably the biggest downfall that you have, is that you have to kind of think, if you're going to have multiple extensions, you have to think on how you want to design it and who has access to what, because if you have them conflicting, you are going to run into a problem. So you do have to really make sure that one person only has access to that screen on one extensibility unit, but you can combine things together into one unit so that you can tackle, multiple tasks with one unit.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're about at our half hour. I'm not seeing any other questions out there right now. So thank you all for joining us today. And we are, please reach out to us if you have any questions. We're happy to get on the phone and talk with you. Any further detail you might want on extensibilities and what's possible, but hopefully this gave you kind of a good overview. I think with that, Don, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thanks, Brad. And Jeff, if you could go back to the PowerPoint presentation, we've got just a couple of slides that we can, there we went through the demo and the Q&A. So as Brad mentioned, this is the contact information for Brad and Jeff. Feel free to reach out to them at these email addresses. You can certainly also reach us in general at growahead@neosystemscorp.com. I did want to mention also, as Brad had referenced this early on in the webinar, that we had a previous webinar a few months ago that was a bit higher level in relation to integrations, web services, and extensibilities. You can find that on our website, neosystemscorp.com, under the resources area. We've got an on-demand webinar archive, and just search for the Costpoint section, and you'll be able to find that webinar as well as several other webinars that we've been doing over the last several months. So that will conclude today's session. I want to thank Brad and Jeff for their time, and certainly thank everyone for attending today. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. That's it. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.